Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. My name is Layla. I'm 32 years old, married for 6 years to a man I genuinely love, or at least, I thought I understood what love looked like until the night everything quietly shifted. It started with a message. Just a simple, "Hey, did you guys make it home okay?" from Daniel, our new neighbor, 34, tall, the kind of guy who laughs easily and makes everyone in the room feel seen. His wife, Mara, had become my closest friend almost overnight. She was warm, effortlessly beautiful, the type of woman who remembers your coffee order and asks about your mother by name. The four of us had been spending a lot of time together, weekend dinners, game nights, late evenings on the back patio with wine and music playing low. My husband, Ryan, loved them. I loved them. It felt safe. It felt normal. But somewhere between the laughter and the lingering conversations, something else was quietly growing, something I didn't have a name for yet. I noticed it first in the little things. The way Daniel would hold eye contact a beat too long when I was talking. The way Mara would touch Ryan's arm when she laughed, and how Ryan's energy changed, subtly, the way candlelight flickers before it steadies. I told myself I was reading into nothing. Then the messages started. Not inappropriate, never, not at first. Daniel would text about a recipe Mara had mentioned I wanted. I'd reply. He'd reply back. Ryan was always asleep by then. One night, I put my phone face down on the nightstand, heart beating just slightly faster than it should have been, and I asked myself a question I wasn't ready to answer. Why am I smiling? Ryan was breathing quietly beside me, completely trusting, completely unaware. And that's the moment I should have stopped. That's the moment I should have put up every wall I had. But I didn't. Mara and Daniel had moved in next door 8 months ago, in the middle of October, the kind of crisp autumn that makes everything feel a little more alive. Ryan and I had been in a quiet season. Not bad, not broken, just quiet. 6 years of marriage has a rhythm, and ours had settled into something comfortable. Predictable. We loved each other the way people do when life gets full, school loans paid off, careers climbing, weekends blending into each other. Solid. But somewhere along the way, we'd stopped surprising each other. Daniel and Mara felt like a breath of fresh air for both of us. Mara was a painter. She had this incredible ability to describe color the way most people describe emotions, deeply, personally, like it meant something only she could fully explain. I admired her. I wanted to be her energy sometimes. And Daniel was a high school literature teacher, thoughtful, well-read, the kind of man who quotes authors not to impress you, but because the words genuinely moved him. The four of us fit together in a way that felt almost too easy. But easy isn't always simple. It was a Friday evening, mid-November, cold outside, when Mara pulled me aside in her kitchen while the guys were watching football in the living room. She poured us both another glass of red wine, leaned against the counter, and looked at me with those knowing eyes of hers. Do you ever feel like you're living slightly beside your own life? She asked quietly. Like you're watching it instead of feeling it? I didn't answer right away. I just looked down at my glass. Because yes. God, yes. She nodded slowly, like my silence was enough of an answer. Then she smiled, soft, a little sad, and clinked her glass against mine. Later that night, walking home, Daniel fell into step beside me while Ryan and Mara walked ahead. The street was quiet, lit only by porch lights and a pale half-moon. His shoulder brushed mine once. He didn't move away. Neither did I. He said nothing. I said nothing. But when I glanced up at him, he was already looking at me. And for 3 full seconds, we just existed in that look. Ryan called back, "You guys coming?" "Yeah," Daniel answered easily. "We're right here." But something, in that moment, had already moved. December arrived the way it always does, loud with holiday noise, family obligations, and the kind of busyness that makes it easy to avoid thinking too clearly about anything. But I was thinking. Constantly. I told myself the moment on that street was nothing. A coincidence of timing, cold air making everything feel more dramatic than it was. I was a married woman who loved her husband. Daniel was a married man who loved his wife. We were four adults who enjoyed each other's company. That was all. Except I started noticing things I couldn't unnotice. Like how Daniel remembered I took my coffee with oat milk, not because Mara told him, but because he'd watched me make it himself one morning and simply remembered. Like how, during group conversations, his responses to what I said were always slightly more considered, slightly more personal than they needed to be. Like he was paying attention on a frequency the others couldn't quite hear. And I, God help me, was paying attention right back. Mara, meanwhile, had started confiding in me about things she said she'd never told anyone. Late-night phone calls, sometimes an hour long. She talked about feeling invisible in her marriage before Daniel, a previous relationship that had quietly hollowed her out. She talked about how she'd rebuilt herself through her painting, through choosing feeling over safety. I spent years being the good girl, she told me one night, her voice low and honest. Doing everything right. And I was miserable, Layla. Truly miserable. I listened. I held every word she gave me like something fragile. What I didn't tell her, what I couldn't, was that Ryan had started pulling away in ways I felt but couldn't prove. Not coldly. Just, distantly. More nights working late. Fewer questions about my day. The physical warmth between us thinning like winter light. I didn't blame him. I didn't even fully blame myself. But loneliness has a way of making you permeable, open to things you'd normally deflect without a second thought. The week before Christmas, Daniel texted me at 11:47 p.m. Are you still awake? I stared at the screen for a long moment. Ryan was already asleep. The house was completely still. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. And I typed back, yes. Those late-night messages became their own secret world. Nothing explicit. Nothing that could be screenshot and called damning. Just two people talking in the dark, honestly, openly, in ways that felt more intimate than anything I'd experienced in months. Daniel would ask me things like, what did you want to be before life got loud? And, when did you last do something just because it made you happy? Simple questions. But nobody had asked me those things in years. I answered every single one. He told me things too. About feeling like he'd become a supporting character in his own life. About how teaching literature all day, stories full of passion, consequence, and raw human longing, made him hyper-aware of how muted his own daily existence had become. He loved Mara. He said it plainly, and I believed him. Just like I loved Ryan. But love, we were quietly discovering together, doesn't automatically fill every empty room inside a person. Christmas came and went in a blur of family dinners and polite smiles. Ryan got me a beautiful necklace. I hugged him and said all the right things. And that night, while he slept, I lay awake staring at the ceiling with a feeling I absolutely refused to name. New Year's Eve changed everything's temperature. The four of us celebrated together, candles, champagne, music that started structured and ended loose and slow. Mara had painted something new and hung it above their fireplace, deep reds and burnt oranges, restless and beautiful. Ryan was more relaxed than he'd been in weeks, laughing freely, his hand finding mine occasionally. But Daniel was across the room. And every time I looked up, he was already looking. By midnight, Mara had pulled Ryan into some ridiculous countdown game in the kitchen, her laughter carrying through the walls. Which left Daniel and me standing near the fireplace, the music low, champagne glasses in hand, that painting burning quietly above us. He turned to face me fully. The fire's light moved across his features in a way that made everything feel cinematic and irreversible. Layla, he said. Just my name. Nothing attached to it. But the way he said it, quiet, deliberate, like he'd been holding it carefully for months. My breath caught somewhere between my chest and my throat. He took one step closer. He didn't finish whatever sentence my name was the beginning of. Mara's laughter exploded from the kitchen, bright and unsuspecting, and Daniel stepped back, just slightly, just enough. The moment folded in on itself like a page turning. We raised our glasses when the countdown hit 0, and I smiled at all the right times, and nobody saw anything because there was nothing to see. That's what I told myself driving home that night, Ryan's hand resting warm on my knee. Nothing happened. But something had. Something that lives entirely in the space between people, invisible, undeniable, and absolutely impossible to put back. January was supposed to reset everything. New year, clean air, fresh intentions. I threw myself into routine. Work, gym, cooking dinner, being present with Ryan. I was deliberate about it. Almost performative. Ryan noticed, told me I seemed good, lighter somehow. He pulled me close one evening and said he felt like he was getting his wife back. I smiled and held him tighter than necessary. Because the truth was, I was fighting. Hard. Every quiet moment was a negotiation with myself. Every time my phone lit up with Daniel's name, and it still did, less frequently now, but persistently, I made myself wait before opening it. Sometimes 20 minutes. Sometimes an hour. But I always opened it. Then the second thing happened. The thing I never anticipated. Mara called me on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice carrying something unfamiliar, lighter, almost nervous. She asked if I could come over. Alone. I found her in her studio, surrounded by fresh canvases, wearing paint-stained overalls, looking simultaneously like herself and like someone I hadn't fully met yet. She poured tea. Sat across from me. And then, holding her mug with both hands, she looked at me with those deep, knowing eyes and said something that rearranged the air in the entire room. Ryan came by yesterday. While you were at work. I kept my face completely still. Okay, what for? He wanted to see one of my paintings. The one from New Year's. She paused, watching me carefully. We talked for almost 2 hours, Layla. Something cold moved through my chest. He told me things, she continued softly. About feeling disconnected. About missing the version of his life that felt exciting. She set her mug down slowly. He reminded me a lot of myself, actually. A few years ago. The silence between us was enormous. I understood, in that moment, that this story was no longer only mine. Ryan wasn't just the innocent, sleeping figure on the other side of the bed. He was awake. He was feeling things. He had walked next door, alone, and sat with my closest friend for 2 hours and told her what he wasn't telling me. We were no longer 2 people drifting quietly. We were 4 people, all of us reaching, all of us lonely, all of us pretending otherwise, standing at the edge of something that, once stepped into, would change every single one of us permanently. That night, Daniel texted. Mara told me she spoke to you today. A pause. Then. We need to talk. The 4 of us. This weekend. I read it 3 times. Then I walked to the bathroom, ran cold water over my wrists, looked at myself in the mirror for a long, hard moment. My reflection looked back at me, calm on the surface, absolutely electric underneath. I typed back 2 words. I know. Saturday arrived the way consequential days always do, quietly, unremarkably, giving no outward signal that anything was different. Ryan made coffee. I showered. We drove to Daniel and Mara's house together, making small conversation about nothing, the weather, a podcast he'd been listening to, whether we needed groceries. Normal. Achingly normal. But my hands were trembling slightly in my lap the entire drive. Mara opened the door before we even knocked. Her eyes found mine immediately, warm, steady, carrying something that looked almost like relief. Daniel stood behind her in the hallway, hands in his pockets, and when he looked at Ryan and then at me, something in his expression was different. Opened up. Decided. We sat in their living room, the same room where everything had been silently building for months. The fireplace was on. That painting still hung above it, restless and red. Mara spoke first. She was honest in the way only truly brave people manage to be, without performance, without blame. She talked about the distance that had grown in their marriage quietly, invisibly. She talked about the conversations she and Ryan had shared and what they'd revealed to her. She looked at Daniel with an expression so complex it could only belong to someone who had loved deeply and struggled genuinely. Daniel nodded slowly. Then he looked directly at me. "I think we all felt something this year," he said carefully. "And I think pretending otherwise would be the most dishonest thing any of us could do." Ryan, my steady, quiet Ryan, reached across and took my hand. "I know I've been absent," he said, his voice low and rough in a way I hadn't heard in years. "And I'm sorry." Something cracked open in my chest. Wide and sudden. We talked for 3 hours. Honestly. Painfully. Beautifully. Things were named that had been nameless for months. Feelings were placed on the table between 4 people who genuinely cared about each other and had somehow, in their loneliness, nearly destroyed everything they'd built. And then, the twist I never saw coming. Mara reached into her studio bag and pulled out a canvas. Small, intimate, clearly painted recently. She set it facing us. It was a portrait. 2 couples. Painted from memory. From New Year's Eve. She had seen everything. She had always seen everything. And she had painted it anyway, not as accusation, but as understanding. As a mirror held gently up to all 4 of us. "I didn't paint this to hurt anyone," she said quietly. "I painted it because it was true. And because I think we all needed to see ourselves clearly before we could choose what happens next." The room was absolutely silent. Ryan's grip on my hand tightened. Some stories end with dramatic conclusions. Doors slamming, tears falling, lives splitting cleanly apart like broken glass. Ours didn't. Ours ended the way real life usually does, slowly, imperfectly, with people choosing each other not in one grand moment but in dozens of quiet, deliberate ones that follow. Mara's painting stayed propped against their fireplace for weeks. None of us asked her to move it. It became something we'd all silently agreed to let exist, a truth rendered in burnt orange and deep red, honest and unashamed. The 4 of us continued seeing each other. But everything had shifted in the way a room shifts after you rearrange the furniture. Same walls, different feeling. Conversations were deeper now, stripped of performance. Nobody pretended anymore. And somewhere inside that honesty, something genuinely beautiful grew. Ryan and I started talking again. Really talking, the kind that happens late at night when defenses dissolve and you remember why you chose this person in the first place. He admitted he'd felt invisible inside our routine. I admitted I'd gone searching for feeling in directions I shouldn't have. Neither of us minimized it. Neither of us weaponized it. We chose, instead, to begin again. It wasn't instant. Rebuilding rarely is. There were awkward evenings and conversations that started too carefully and silences that held more weight than they used to. But Ryan would reach for my hand in the car again. And I'd let myself lean into him the way I had years ago, fully, without reservation. Daniel and Mara went through their own quiet reconstruction. She threw herself into a new series of paintings, lighter this time, more air in them. He started writing again, something he'd abandoned in his 20s. They looked, from where I stood, like 2 people remembering each other. Spring arrived and the 4 of us had dinner one last Friday, outside this time, the air finally warm, candles on the table, wine poured generously. At one point, Mara caught my eye across the table and smiled, small, knowing, completely sincere. No words necessary. I looked at Ryan beside me, laughing at something Daniel had said, completely present, completely mine. And I thought about how the most dangerous season of my marriage had somehow, improbably, led me back to its truest version. Not every fire destroys. Sometimes it just burns away everything that was never real, leaving behind only what genuinely matters. I reached under the table and found Ryan's hand. He was already reaching for mine.